How is it that the tech community can embrace the progressive economics when you have companies like Uber going out there fighting the taxi unions, and a lot of technology and these tech companies is about modernizing and making things easier for everyday people?
No one is saying tech is perfect. We need to stand up for strong antitrust protection. We need to stand up so that they're paying taxes on money overseas and not just moving money offshore to avoid corporate tax. So like any industry, we need people who are going to hold tech accountable. That said, technology can also provide opportunity. I was in Appalachia, coal miners' kids, talking about how they loved coal jobs, but they were being trained 4 months on iOS software for Apple, Android software for Google, $40,000 jobs at the end of it, training. And they were saying that here's how technology could transform them. In the past, they had to either leave Appalachia to get a job, or they had to go into coal or become a doctor or a nurse. Now there's so many other job opportunities for them based on technology, and they can stay in their communities. So we have to look at what is the positive role that technology can play. There's obviously a negative role. And then how do we make that positive future humane? How do we make sure these tech companies are treating people as employees, not contractors? What I tell them is, you're making $1 gazillion. It's not going to kill you to make sure that we have $15 minimum wage. It's not going to kill you to make sure we're treating people as employees. It's not going to kill you to pay tax in the U.S. Let's tax them to give us a better shot at a middle-class future. Not that we're blocking technological progress.
I was reading a little bit about some trade, just the numbers on how many jobs were lost due to NAFTA and how many jobs lost due to automation.
Right.
And it's shocking how many more were lost to automation. So I think a lot of folks in communities that have already been hit hard, when Uber went to Pittsburgh, of all communities, to experiment with their driverless car, I think it just reignites all of those fears that, whether jobs are displaced because companies went overseas or because, of NAFTA or other TPP, the automation argument is not being had enough on our side. I see it on Fox Business all the time as the excuse, and CNBC, but not enough on our side.
I agree with that. And Trump actually mentioned automation as this culprit. And I think we have to be aware of people's fears of technology and then say, well, how does technology empower you? And this is where Tech Hire, this program across the country that was started, which said, in Kentucky is a great example. They call that place Silicon Holler, of all places, Eastern Kentucky. And they get that technology is transforming their lives, but they said, look, now you're an English major. If you understand how to blog, suddenly you can actually have a career out of Appalachia, Eastern Kentucky, and have an economic future, which may not have been possible in the past. So yes, there's a displacement effect, but there's also a positive impact. And then how do we have the programs of a expanded earned income tax credit for wage support, knowing that people aren't going to have the same hours necessarily, retirement security with Social Security expansion, Medicare for all, and the actual apprenticeship programs for the jobs of the future. But we have to be honest about it. And to say to folks, okay, we can just stop technology is to sell a falsehood. And I don't think our party should be intellectually dishonest. What we have to do is offer an economic vision of how we can empower folks being left behind.
Speaking of an economic vision, Trump released his proposed budget last week, the skinny budget. This won't get passed. Most of it won't get passed. But
thankfully.
What are some of the areas that you're concerned will get passed?
I'm really concerned about the community block grants, the $3 billion cut. And it's shocking to me, given someone campaigned on America First, building American cities. Here's $3 billion that goes to building American cities, transportation, infrastructure, job training. I mean, I can't think of a more a dumb proposal than, frankly, than cutting that. Hopefully the Republicans will push back on that. But on a human level, one thing that I'm concerned the Republicans may not push back is foreign aid. And here, George Bush, I disagreed with about everything Bush Cheney did. The one thing he did that we should all give him credit for is he helped save people in Africa with HIV. We put billions of dollars in foreign aid to help people with the antiviral drugs. And we're going to cut that? I mean, that is so inhumane. And so I think defending the foreign aid budget, which is less than 1%, which is going to humanitarian causes. One of the things that annoyed me so much about Trump's speech was when he said, well, it's America's national interest and America first, and all nations follow their self-interest. Well, I thought the whole idea about American exceptionalism is we're not all nations. Yeah, other nations just follow their national interest. We care about morality. We care about humanity. That's what makes America exceptional. So we should care about the moral case about what we're going to do for other countries.
And unfortunately, he did it off of the message of, well, we've left our own people behind, and it's not like, cutting research and development and some of the stuff involving, cancer research.
Right.
And of course, if you don't have, a strong healthcare system, you're going to have a sick, hurt, group of Americans out there that, again, they're already behind hurting, how they're going to be able to move ahead. When I looked at that budget, to me, from a holistic perspective, from a 30,000 foot perspective, I saw it and I thought, this is not just business as usual for Republicans. This is somebody who is actively trying to hurt America at every single level, like almost dismantle the government.
No, dismantling the New Deal coalition. This has been the Republican dream for the last 50 years, right? And this is why I think that Republicans give Trump so much allowance. You talk to members of Congress and they don't agree with everything he says, even Republicans. They're as embarrassed. But why do they give him such a pass? Why aren't they speaking out? It's because he's helping achieve their vision, which is the dismantling of the administrative state, the dismantling of the New Deal in a way that even Ronald Reagan did. And so they're saying, okay, we're going to make a bargain with the devil. He's giving us what we want. Let's ignore everything else.
And at a time when the story about Russia, today James Comey is in hearings being questioned by both sides, but it seems to be very one-sided in terms of the debate from the Republican side. It just seems like our democracy has been under attack. Whether Russia or not Russia, we were probably weaker than we knew. We rebounded from the economy, as you said in your piece in the Sacramento Bee, on the Wall Street level, but not in regular everyday communities. People are still hurting.
Right.
And then to have a budget like this tacked on that hurts these communities, and then to have Russia prying at our democratic systems, it just seems like we're in a very weak state. And I listened to that hearing, and you have a lot of smart people asking questions on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
But I'm still very concerned. I think a lot of folks are still very concerned that the Democratic Party won't be able to unite and rebuild quickly enough to defeat these types of interests in the midterms.
I think that's a real concern. People ought to have that concern because the energy is there. I mean, 1,000 people are showing up to my town halls, but the question is, can we have the vision and can we have the right candidates and can we have an inspiring platform? We can't just assume that we're going to win on Trump's missteps. We have to have a clear economic platform that's going to appeal to folks in places like Michigan and Ohio and Arkansas and Kentucky and places that we lost, and we've got to be willing to take a risk on something bold. And I think that's really where the frustration with the base is they see the same type of incrementalism. And it's not just a messaging problem, right? It's not just, okay, if we use some different word or George Lakoff, we have the wrong frame. It's a vision problem. It's a substance problem. They are hurting. The globalization has eviscerated in part the middle class, and the money has gone to corporate interests. The money has gone to CEOs. They feel that their wages have stagnated since 1979 to today for most middle class families. The cost of healthcare has gone up. The cost of education has gone up. Why wouldn't you be upset? Why wouldn't you be angry? And they don't see the Democratic Party having done anything for them. And so they're saying, okay, we'll take a chance with protectionist and xenophobic policies. Well, what's the solution to that? It's not to keep pointing out that the policies are protectionist or maybe xenophobic. The solution is to say, here's what we're going to do to give you a shot at the American dream. We get that you haven't had a fair shake. And we're going to be bold about it and deliberate. And we're going to go to places like New York and Silicon Valley and say, look, you're doing really well. Step up, because the rest of the country isn't, and we don't want a divided nation.
So how do you convince your fellow Democrats that, the only message shouldn't be, unity as a brand, and Russia is bad, and, Donald Trump is a giant conflict of interest?
Right.
How do you convince them to look internally and say, okay, this is what we actually have to do, and we have to talk about economics? I mean, I don't hear that coming from leaders within the Democratic Party.
Yeah,
I mean, some who are running, but yeah.
Well, I think that this is why I'm on your show, trying to convince them and why I wrote an op-ed. But I think the question is what accounts for Donald Trump's election. If you believe that, as I do, that Donald Trump's election was a huge cry for help from people saying the system isn't working for us, then the first question will be not, okay, let's point out the flaws of everything about Donald Trump. The first question will be, let's reflect on what we did wrong. Why are we so disconnected from such a large part of the country? And by that we, I mean people in politics, people in the traditional media, people who are business leaders. There's a cry for help. And my view is that this is only going to potentially get worse if we don't step up, because we know in the Industrial Revolution, it took 50 years of gross income inequality before there was more justice and equality. If we want to be one country, if we want to heal the divisions, we cannot have this kind of income inequality. And it's a tough conversation to have because they're not simple answers. And it's much easier to get on television, frankly, and talk about all the dumb things Trump may be doing or saying. It's a much harder thing to say, we have got to figure out how do we bridge this income divide. And that's, I think, what the party ought to be doing and being self-reflective about it.
What's the split like? I mean, I'm of the belief that it's not, 95% of the Democratic Party that is rah-rah, unity.
Right.
I actually do think that there's a divide. But within Congress, what would you say? You have the Progressive Caucus, but that's a diverse group of people in Congress,
right.
Democrats in Congress.
Yeah.
How would you say the divide is right now between those who are willing to step up and talk about economics versus those who are resistant?
Well, I think the Progressive Caucus has a lot of energy, and Mark Pocan and Jamie Raskin and Keith Ellison, I think, are out there. One of the things that surprised me going to Congress is you have all these folks who are, by definition, type A personalities. They take huge risks. It takes a lot of risk to run for Congress. And then you get to Congress, and they're saying, okay, don't say something that's going to upset leadership. Don't criticize leadership. My own staff, don't mention something that could be upsetting to leadership. Who cares? You're one of 435 members of Congress. You're just as important as the Speaker of the House. No one. You're there representing Congress, your constituency. Speak your mind. Be bold. Criticize people. Criticize your own party. That's what you're there for. And this idea of unity, we're not sheep. Our founders weren't sheep. They, Jefferson and Madison, they didn't say, let's have unity. They debated vociferously. And then out of that came solid, thoughtful ideas. And that's, I think, what we're so afraid of, our own shadows in politics. And I think what Bernie Sanders showed, here was a guy, my jaw dropped. I saw him on MSNBC one day on Chris Matthews' Hardball quoting Noam Chomsky, and he got almost 50% of the vote. I said, if a guy can quote Noam Chomsky and get almost 50% of the vote, what are we so afraid of? And that's, I think, where we need more dissent. We need more disagreement. And so I love this indivisible groups. I love Justice Democrats. I love this pouring out of energy on the outside. I think that's what's going to really rearrange things in Congress. Final thoughts for the TYT audience, the TYT army that's listening? Well, I think don't underestimate your own influence. What's happening for the Democratic Party is much more interesting on the outside than on the inside. There is a stagnation of ideas in our party, and we need a new vision. We need people who are going to put out the bold ideas for the Democrats, just like Paul Ryan and Newt Gingrich and others did for the Republicans. Barry Goldwater, Reagan, they moved the Republican Party. We need that same energy. I had said somewhat facetiously, but I believe it. Let's fire all the Democratic consultants, put Robert Reich, Stephanie Kelton, and Paul Krugman in a room, and they do a hell of a better job coming up with their agenda. So my view of the Young Turks is it matters what you're doing. Be out there tweeting, be out there blogging, be out there articulating the direction you want our party to go. And I actually think helping lobby Democrats and our own leadership first is helpful, so we have a great vision, and then let's get to how we win the election. But, and this is the last point I'll end with, one of the things in politics that often frustrated me, when people would say to young people, how do I get into politics? And they'd say, well, here's what you need to learn. You need to go knock on doors. You need to learn how to fundraise. You need to learn how to be on Twitter and Facebook. And what I would say is, well, why don't you go read? I mean, first you need a vision. You need something you stand for in politics, a conviction. Our party is so obsessed on the mechanics.
Right.
I was in a caucus and someone said, well, we shouldn't have any idea before it's vetted by data. I said, what? The guy who just became president of the United States didn't poll. And you're saying we need a more data-driven approach? We need a more inspiration-driven approach. And that's what I think the Young Turk audience can do. Help the Democrats develop a conviction-based politics. Help us find our voice so that next year, when we are into the logistics and the mechanics of winning, we will have a vision that can actually convince people, as opposed to just worrying about all the logistics. And they shouldn't underestimate themselves. If 1,000 people start tweeting, Facebook, members of Congress will listen, or face competitive primary elections, which I'm all for. I mean, I say, I mean, people want to run against me. I'm confident enough that let people have a vision. Let the voters decide. That's what democracy is. It shouldn't be incumbent protection. I think primary challenges are great. It's one of the reasons we had such a dismal showing in the presidential election. They had 17 candidates. We had a few because we tried to control who runs. No one should fear democracy or the democratic process.
I know we're wrapping it up, but I just want to say the average age of Congress is in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And you're one of the younger members of Congress, and you did. You challenged, you primaried. It's a difficult process, and in California, a little bit different.
Yeah.
There are some younger members. Would you encourage young members, instead of leaving the party, as a lot of young Democrats right now, or young progressives, are Bernie Sanders supporters are thinking? They're thinking of doing that right now. Would you encourage them to go out there and run so they can take over the party?
I would encourage them to run, and I'd encourage them to be active. But here's what I think is often patronizing. You have these folks saying, oh, well, don't go become a third party person and you've got an obligation to stay in the Democratic Party. No, that's not the right view. The right view is we have an obligation to win their trust. We have an obligation to offer them a vision and a reason to stay. And if there are more parties, that's fine. The democracy ought to be messy. It ought to be, and so what I would say to them is, try to shape the Democratic Party locally. Try to shape it nationally. If you're frustrated, then run as an independent. Go make your mark. But be engaged in the political process. And maybe that's where I'll end, is even if the Democratic Party may not be a perfect vehicle, I think it can be better and we can reform it. But I'll tell you this, I think that American democracy is still extraordinary. I mean, my own story, I'm of Hindu faith, parents immigrated, was born in Philadelphia, I'm 40 years old. I represent a district which is the most economically successful district in the world with Apple and Google. And there's an openness to the American political system that is extraordinary for all its flaws. And that's what I hope people will understand, that they don't feel disenfranchised. If the Democratic Party is the vehicle, great. If that's not the vehicle, go protest, go run as a third party, but be engaged. Your voice really can make a difference.